The crack of a hammer against flesh echoed through the bustling town square of Ely, Nevada, on a sweltering summer day in 1877, as Grace Zimmerman stood on the wooden auction block, her 3 young children clinging desperately to her tattered skirts. The tears streaming down her face glistened in the merciless sun as the auctioneer's voice boomed across the crowd. Next up, one female house servant with 3 youngsters, sold as a complete lot or separately to the highest bidder. Grace's body trembled as she clutched her children closer, 8-year-old Abigail with her honey-colored braids, 6-year-old Thomas with his father's determined jaw, and little Margaret, barely 4, who buried her tear-streaked face in the folds of her mother's dress. The death of Grace's husband to typhoid fever 6 months prior had left her destitute, unable to pay the mounting debts he'd secretly accumulated. Their small homestead had been seized, and now they faced the ultimate humiliation, being sold to cover what remained of their debts. $20 for the woman alone, called a portly man with a cruel twist to his lips. Don't need no children underfoot. 15 for the eldest girl, shouted another. She looks strong enough for kitchen work. Grace's heart shattered. They would separate her from her babies. She pulled them tighter against her, knowing her feeble resistance would soon be overpowered. $300 for the lot. A deep voice cut through the cacophony of bids. The crowd fell silent, turning to locate the source of the generous offer. From the edge of the gathering, a tall man stepped forward, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Dust covered his worn leather boots, and his denim pants and cotton shirt bore the signs of hard travel. I said 300 for the woman and all 3 children, he repeated, his voice calm but carrying an edge of authority that silenced the muttering crowd. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up. $300 from the gentleman in the back. Do I hear 320? The silence stretched as potential buyers calculated the value of Grace and her children against the substantial sum already offered, going once, going twice. Grace stared at the stranger, his features becoming clearer as he approached. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with a weathered face that spoke of years under the harsh western sun. A thick mustache framed his upper lip, and beneath his hat, she caught the gleam of dark auburn hair. Sold to Mr. The auctioneer paused expectantly. Rawlins. Russell Rawlins, the man supplied, already reaching into his vest pocket to count out the bills. Grace stood frozen, her children still pressed against her. What fate awaited them now? What would this stranger demand of them? Russell Rawlins completed his transaction with the auctioneer, then approached the auction block. His eyes, a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin, met Grace's for the first time. "Madam," he said softly, extending a calloused hand to help her down from the platform. "If you and your children would come with me." Grace hesitated, still clutching her children. "Sir, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please don't separate us." A look of surprise crossed his face, followed by something that might have been compassion. "I have no intention of separating your family, Mrs. Zimmerman." "Grace Zimmerman," she supplied, her voice barely audible. "Mrs. Zimmerman. My wagon's just down the street. We should get your little ones out of this heat." Still wary, Grace allowed him to help her down, then gathered her children close as they followed him through the crowd. People stared as they passed, some with pity, others with cruel curiosity. Grace kept her eyes downcast, the weight of shame heavy on her shoulders. Russell led them to a well-maintained wagon hitched to 2 strong horses. A laden pack horse was tethered behind it. "My ranch is about a day's ride from town," he explained, helping little Margaret into the wagon bed where a layer of fresh straw provided some cushioning. "We'll need to stop for some supplies before heading out." "What?" What will be expected of us? Grace forced herself to ask as Thomas climbed up beside his sister. Russell paused in the act of helping Abigail into the wagon. Mrs. Zimmerman, I purchased your debt papers, not you. There's a difference that matters to me, even if it doesn't to the law just yet. His voice was low, meant only for her ears. You'll have food, shelter, and safety for your children. Beyond that, we can discuss once we're away from prying eyes. Grace searched his face for deception, but found only earnestness. She had no choice but to trust him at least for now. Russell helped her into the wagon beside her children, then climbed onto the driver's bench. With a click of his tongue, he set the horses in motion. Their first stop was a general store where Russell purchased supplies. Flour, sugar, coffee, salt pork, beans, and to Grace's surprise fabric, thread, and 3 small peppermint sticks that he handed to each wide-eyed child. Thank the nice gentleman, Grace prompted softly. Thank you, sir, they mumbled in unison, wonder temporarily overriding their fear. Russell tipped his hat to them with a small smile that softened his weathered features. You're welcome, young uns. Their next stop was a clothier's, where Russell purchased ready-made garments for all 4 of them, simple but sturdy clothes that would withstand ranch life. Mr. Rawlins, Grace began hesitantly as they loaded the purchases into the wagon, I cannot accept such charity. It's not charity, Mrs. Zimmerman, he replied, securing the packages. Consider it an investment in good workers. But there was something in his tone, a gentleness that belied his practical words. As they left Ely behind, the road stretching before them into the vast Nevada landscape, Grace felt a curious mixture of dread and hope. The children, exhausted by the day's events, dozed in the wagon bed, cushioned by blankets Russell had provided. Mr. Rawlins, she ventured when they had traveled several miles in silence, may I ask why you did this? Surely a single man has no need for a woman with 3 young children. Russell kept his eyes on the road, the reins held loosely in his capable hands. I needed help at the ranch, he said simply. Then, after a pause, and I couldn't stand by and watch a family torn apart. His jaw tightened. I've seen enough of that in my lifetime. Grace studied his profile, noting the tension in his shoulders and the way his hands gripped the reins more firmly now. You're a kind man, Mr. Rawlins. He gave a short, humorless laugh. No, Mrs. Zimmerman, I'm not particularly kind. Just someone who believes children belong with their mothers. His tone suggested the subject was closed. They traveled until dusk, stopping to make camp beside a small stream. Russell efficiently set up a simple campsite, building a fire and preparing a meal of beans, salt pork, and biscuits that he mixed and baked in a Dutch oven nestled in the coals. The children watched him with fascination, particularly Thomas, who edged closer to observe Russell's every move. You want to help, young man? Russell asked, noticing the boy's interest. Thomas nodded eagerly. Come here then. I'll show you how to build a proper fire that won't smoke you out of your bedroll. Grace watched as Russell patiently explained the arrangement of kindling and larger wood pieces, letting Thomas add sticks under his guidance. The simple interaction brought a lump to her throat. It had been months since her son had a man to look up to. After their meal, Russell spread bedrolls around the fire. You and your children take the wagon bed, Mrs. Zimmerman. It'll be more comfortable. But where will you sleep? Grace asked. I've got my bedroll here by the fire, been sleeping under the stars most of my life. He tipped his hat. Rest well. We'll start early tomorrow. As Grace settled her children in the wagon, she caught Russell staring into the flames, his expression distant. She wondered what ghosts haunted this solitary cowboy who'd spent $300 to keep a stranger's family intact. They arrived at Russell's ranch the following afternoon. It wasn't large by Nevada standards, but appeared well maintained. A solid two-story main house built of timber and stone, a barn, corral, chicken coop, and several outbuildings. A small garden plot showed signs of neglect, though a few hardy plants still struggled to produce. "It's not much," Russell said as he helped Grace down from the wagon, "but it's mine, free and clear." "It's lovely," Grace replied honestly, taking in the sweeping view of sage-dotted hills rolling toward distant mountains. The house interior revealed a bachelor's sparse accommodations, functional, but lacking any feminine touches. The main floor consisted of a kitchen with a large cast-iron stove, a dining area, and a sitting room with two worn but comfortable-looking chairs flanking a stone fireplace. A narrow staircase led to the upper floor. "There are 2 bedrooms upstairs," Russell explained. "Mine's at the back. You and the children can have the larger one at the front. It gets better light." He seemed almost apologetic. "There's only 1 bed, but it's big enough for the 4 of you. I can build another if needed." Grace was overwhelmed by his consideration. "That's very generous, Mr. Rawlins." "Russell," he corrected softly. "If we're to live under the same roof, you might as well use my given name." "Russell," she repeated, the name feeling strange on her tongue, "and I'm Grace." He nodded, then cleared his throat. "I should explain what I expect now that we're here." Grace tensed, her children gathering close to her once more. "I need help running this place," Russell began, speaking directly and honestly. "I've been managing alone since my father passed 3 years ago, but it's too much for one man. I need someone to look after the house, the cooking, the chickens, and the garden, which I've clearly neglected." His lips quirked in a self-deprecating smile. "In return, you'll have food, shelter, and safety. I'll provide for your children's education and other needs. And my debt." Grace asked cautiously, "Consider it paid. The papers are yours to burn if you wish." She blinked in surprise. "Just like that? You'd surrender your legal claim?" Russell's eyes held her steadily. "I don't want to own people, Grace. I want willing help from someone who has reason to see this place thrive. Your children can grow up here, safe and together." Grace felt tears welling. "Why would you do this for strangers?" A shadow passed across Russell's face. "Let's just say I understand what it means to be at the mercy of others' whims." He straightened, shifting to practical matters. "The children can help too, as they're able. The boy, Thomas," Grace supplied. "Thomas can learn ranching if he's interested. The girls can help you or me, depending on their inclinations. I believe in useful work for children, but not exploitation." "You're a surprising man, Russell Rawlins," Grace said softly. He looked uncomfortable with her assessment. "I'm a practical one. Now you all must be exhausted. Why don't you settle in while I tend to the horses? There's a pump in the kitchen for water, and the outhouse is just behind the house." With that, he tipped his hat and strode out, leaving Grace to wonder at the strange turn her life had taken. The first weeks at the ranch established a routine. Grace rose early to prepare breakfast before Russell headed out to his ranch work. The children quickly adapted to their new surroundings, especially Thomas, who followed Russell like a shadow whenever permitted. Even shy little Margaret blossomed in the security of their new home, chattering more than Grace had heard in months. Grace threw herself into revitalizing the neglected house. She scrubbed floors, washed curtains, aired bedding, and organized the kitchen. Russell never commented directly on these improvements, but she sometimes caught him looking around with a pleased expression that warmed her more than any spoken praise might have. The garden became her special project. She expanded it considerably, planting vegetables that would see them through the coming winter. Russell silently provided seeds, tools, and even helped her build a fence to keep rabbits out. "My mother kept a garden like this," he remarked one evening as they stood surveying her work. Nothing tasted better than her fresh tomatoes. It was the first personal information he'd volunteered, and Grace treasured it like a rare gift. By mid-August, life had settled into a comfortable pattern. Grace and Russell orbited each other carefully, maintaining a respectful distance while sharing the intimacy of a household. She learned to recognize his moods, the quiet contentment after a productive day, the rare flashes of humor that transformed his serious face, the melancholy that sometimes descended without warning. One evening, as summer's heat began giving way to autumn's chill, Grace sat on the porch mending clothes while the children played in the yard. Russell returned from checking fence lines, dusty and tired but satisfied. "How are they settling in?" he asked, nodding toward the children as he settled onto the porch step below her, removing his hat to run a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. "Wonderfully," Grace replied, smiling as she watched Abigail organizing some game with her siblings. "They feel safe here." "That's more precious than you can imagine." Russell was silent for a long moment. "They're good children. You've done well by them, especially considering what you've been through." Grace's hand stilled on her mending. "Thank you." She hesitated, then asked, "Do you ever regret taking us in?" "It must be an adjustment having a house full of noise after living alone." A smile touched his lips. "I find I don't mind the noise. The house was too quiet before." His expression grew more serious. "Grace, there's something I should tell you." Her heart quickened with apprehension. "Yes." "I'm riding into Carson City tomorrow. I'll be gone about a week." He seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "I'm going to speak with a lawyer about your situation, about making your freedom official, legally binding, and about the children." "The children," Grace tensed. "To ensure no one can ever separate them from you," he clarified quickly. "To protect your family." Relief flooded through her. "That's incredibly thoughtful." Russell shifted uncomfortably, unused to gratitude. "It's just practical. Should anything happen to me, I want to be sure you and the children are protected." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Grace said, surprising herself with the fierceness in her voice. His eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. "All the same, it needs doing." The week of Russell's absence stretched interminably. Grace found herself watching the horizon for his return, startling at every distant sound of hoofbeats. The children asked for him repeatedly, especially Thomas, who missed his riding lessons and stories of cattle drives. When Russell finally appeared on the horizon, Grace had to restrain herself from running to meet him. Instead, she stood on the porch, her heart pounding as she watched his approach. The children had no such reservations, racing across the yard with excited shouts. Russell dismounted, smiling broadly as Thomas reached him first. He ruffled the boy's hair, answered Abigail's rapid-fire questions, and swept little Margaret up when she raised her arms demandingly. With the girl perched on his hip, he approached the house, his eyes finding Grace's. "Welcome home," she said softly. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps pleasure. "Thank you. It's good to be back." That evening, after the children were asleep, Russell shared the results of his journey. Seated at the kitchen table, he spread out several official-looking documents. "It's all here," he explained. "Your debt is officially cleared. This document confirms you're a free woman employed as housekeeper at the Rawlins Ranch, with fair compensation." He pushed another paper forward. "And this establishes legal guardianship of your children should anything happen to you. It names me as guardian with explicit instructions that the children must remain together." Grace's eyes filled with tears as she stared at the papers. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to. I want you to understand that you're free to leave whenever you choose. I won't hold you here." His voice was steady, but Grace detected something beneath the words of fear, perhaps, that she might take him up on the offer. "We're not going anywhere," she assured him, reaching impulsively to cover his hand with hers. "This is home now." His fingers twitched beneath hers but didn't withdraw. They sat in silence, connected by that simple touch, until Russell gently pulled away. "There's something else," he said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small bag and placed it before her. "Your wages, retroactive to when you arrived. It's not much, but it's yours to do with as you please." Grace stared at the bag, unable to remember the last time she'd had money of her own. "Russell, you've earned it," he said firmly. "And more besides." The seasons turned, and with them, subtle shifts occurred in the household. Russell began taking his meals at the table rather than eating quickly and returning to work. He started spending evenings in the sitting room, whittling wooden animals for the children, or reading from one of his precious books. Sometimes he'd read aloud, his deep voice bringing stories to life for the enraptured children and for Grace, who often found herself pausing in her work to listen. As winter settled over the ranch, they were drawn closer by necessity, and the intimacy of long evenings confined indoors. Grace learned that Russell had a dry sense of humor that emerged unexpectedly, and that he was surprisingly knowledgeable about literature, history, and even music, though he claimed to carry a tune like a bucket with a hole in it. One snowy evening in December, after the children were asleep, Grace found Russell at the table with paper and pencil, his brow furrowed in concentration. "What are you working on?" she asked, placing a cup of coffee beside him. He hesitated, then turned the paper toward her. It was a rough sketch of the house with an addition extending from the side. "I've been thinking," he said carefully, "that the children should have more space as they grow. The girls will want privacy eventually, and Thomas is already shooting up like a weed." Grace studied the drawing, touched by his consideration. "It's a wonderful idea. I thought I'd start gathering materials after winter breaks. There's a stand of good pine on the north section that would provide most of what we need." He spoke matter-of-factly, but Grace noticed how he included her in the planning. "We, not I. The children will be thrilled," she said. "Especially Thomas. He's never had a room of his own." Russell nodded, sipping his coffee. "He's a good boy. Reminds me a bit of myself at that age, always underfoot, asking questions." "You were close to your father?" Grace asked, seizing the rare opportunity to learn more about his past. A shadow crossed his face. "No, not my father. There was a ranch hand, Joe Blackstone. He took me under his wing, taught me everything worth knowing." His voice softened with memory. "Patient man. Never raised his voice, even when I made the same mistake 3 times running." Grace had learned to recognize the moments when Russell might open up, and this seemed to be one. She settled into the chair across from him. "Your parents weren't kind." Russell stared into his coffee for a long moment. "My mother died when I was 5. My father—" He paused, choosing his words. "He was a hard man. Believed children, like horses, needed breaking early." Grace's heart ached at the implication. "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago." Russell's tone suggested closure, but his eyes held old pain. "Is that why you helped us?" Grace asked softly. "Because of your childhood?" He met her gaze directly. "Partly. I saw those children clinging to you on that auction block, and all I could think was that no one stepped in when I needed it." His jaw tightened. "And no child should be separated from a mother who clearly loves them." Grace fought back tears. "Well, I thank God every day that you were there." Russell looked away, uncomfortable with her emotion. It was the right thing to do. Christmas approached, bringing a flurry of secret preparations. Grace used some of her saved wages to purchase small gifts for the children and for Russell a new pocket knife to replace his worn one. The children made gifts with her help. a whittled horse from Thomas, a handkerchief embroidered with clumsy initials from Abigail, and a drawing from Margaret. On Christmas Eve, snow fell softly outside while inside, the house glowed with warmth, and the scent of pine from the small tree Russell had cut and brought home. The children had decorated it with paper chains, dried berries, and small wooden ornaments Russell had carved. After a special supper, Russell surprised them all by producing a fiddle from a case Grace had never seen before. "You play?" she asked, delighted. "Poorly," he admitted with a rare, full smile, "but it's Christmas." He played simple tunes, some with words that he encouraged them all to sing. The children danced around the sitting room, their faces alight with joy. Grace sang along, watching Russell's usually serious face transform with pleasure at the children's delight. When the little ones finally tired and were tucked into bed, Russell and Grace returned to the sitting room where the fire had burned low. Russell poured 2 small glasses of whiskey, offering one to Grace. "To your first Christmas at Rawlins Ranch," he said, raising his glass. "And hopefully not our last," she replied, surprising herself with the admission. They sipped in companionable silence, watching the fire. "I have something for you," Russell said suddenly, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "It's not much, but—" Grace accepted it with trembling fingers. Inside the paper was a small book of poetry Tennyson, well worn but carefully preserved. "It was my mother's," Russell explained, looking almost shy. "I thought you might enjoy it. You mentioned liking poetry once." Tears sprang to Grace's eyes. The gift of something so personal, so precious to him, spoke volumes that Russell himself might never articulate. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you. You're welcome." His voice was gruff with emotion. Grace reached beneath her chair and retrieved her gift for him. "I have something for you too." Russell carefully unwrapped the pocketknife, his expression softening as he examined it. "It's perfect," he said, meeting her eyes. "Thank you, Grace." They sat in silence again, but something had changed in the air between them, an acknowledgment of deepening feelings that neither was quite ready to name. Winter gave way to spring, bringing new life to the ranch. A foal was born to Russell's favorite mare. Calves appeared in the small herd, and Grace's garden began producing tender shoots. The children thrived, growing taller and stronger under Russell's and Grace's care. As promised, Russell began work on the house addition as soon as weather permitted. Grace often brought lunch to him and Thomas, who insisted on helping despite being too small for many tasks. She enjoyed watching them work together, Russell's patient instruction and Thomas's eager attempts to prove himself useful. On one such afternoon, Grace approached with a basket containing sandwiches and apple pie, only to stop short at the sight before her. Russell had removed his shirt in the spring heat, and the muscles of his back and shoulders flexed as he drove nails into a beam. Thomas mimicked his stance, his small hammer making considerably less progress. Grace's breath caught in her throat. She'd known Russell was strong, had seen evidence of it daily, but there was something about the sight of him working, sweat glistening on his skin, that stirred something long dormant within her. As if sensing her presence, Russell turned. For a moment they simply looked at each other, something unspoken passing between them before Russell reached for his shirt, pulling it back on with a nod of acknowledgement. "Lunch," Grace announced, her voice unnaturally bright. "And pie. Pie." Thomas exclaimed, dropping his hammer and racing toward her. Russell followed more slowly, his eyes never leaving Grace's face. "Thank you. We've worked up an appetite." They ate in the shade of a large oak, the conversation flowing easily around Thomas's excited descriptions of their progress. When the boy ran off to check on the new foal, a charged silence fell between the adults. "Grace," Russell began, his voice unusually hesitant, "I've been meaning to ask you something." Her heart quickened. "Yes." Before he could continue, Thomas's panicked shout reached them. "Ma, Russell! Come quick! Abigail's hurt." They found the girl at the corral fence, tears streaming down her face as she clutched her arm. She'd fallen while trying to climb the rails, and her wrist bent at an unnatural angle. Russell assessed the injury with gentle hands. "It's broken," he said grimly. "I need to set it before we take her to town for the doctor." Grace held her daughter while Russell splinted the wrist with practiced efficiency. His calm competence steadied them all, even Abigail, who stopped crying and watched him with trust despite her pain. "You've done this before," Grace observed as they loaded Abigail into the wagon. "Too many times," Russell confirmed, helping Grace up beside her daughter. "Broken bones are common enough on a ranch." The trip to town and the doctor's visit passed in a blur. By the time they returned home, Abigail was sleeping, exhausted from pain and the laudanum the doctor had administered. Russell carried her to bed, his large hands incongruously gentle as he tucked the blankets around her. "She'll be fine," he assured Grace, who hovered anxiously. "Children heal quickly." Later that night, after checking on all 3 sleeping children, Grace found Russell on the porch, staring at the stars. "Thank you," she said, joining him. "For knowing what to do today," he shrugged. "Anyone would have." "No," Grace contradicted gently. "Not anyone. You were so calm, so sure. You knew exactly how to help her without frightening her further." Russell was silent for a long moment. "When I was 10, he finally said, "I fell from the hayloft and broke my leg. My father was away. Joe, the hand I told you about, he set the bone, made a splint, kept me still until the doctor could come." His voice softened with memory. "He sat with me all night, telling stories to distract me from the pain." Grace moved closer, drawn by this rare glimpse into his past. "He sounds like a wonderful man." He was. Russell's gaze remained on the stars. "He taught me that strength isn't about force, it's about knowing when to be gentle." He turned to face her. "That's what I see in you with your children, Grace. That kind of strength." The compliment warmed her deeply. "I never thought of it that way. You should." His eyes held hers in the moonlight. "It's a rare quality." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, an acknowledgement. Before either could speak, a child's cry from within the house broke the spell. "Margaret," Grace said, already moving toward the door. "She has nightmares sometimes." Russell nodded, understanding without explanation. "Good night, Grace." "Good night, Russell." As spring melted into summer, the house addition neared completion. Russell worked tirelessly, often continuing into the evening hours to finish before the next school term began. Grace worried about his exhaustion, but knew better than to suggest he slow down. Russell Rawlins was a man who finished what he started. One evening in late July, Grace brought coffee to where Russell was installing the last window. The sun was setting, painting the sky in spectacular shades of orange and pink. "It's beautiful," she remarked, gazing at the horizon. "It is," Russell agreed, but when she turned, she found him looking not at the sunset but at her. Heat rose to Grace's cheeks. "The addition looks wonderful." "The children are so excited." Russell accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "Should be ready to move their things in by week's end. Then you can have your room to yourself again." The thought brought an unexpected pang. Grace had grown accustomed to the children's presence, the sound of their breathing as she fell asleep, their warm bodies close to hers. "I may miss them," she admitted. "They won't be far," Russell pointed out. "Just through that door." He gestured to the connecting door between the original house and the addition. "I know." Grace sipped her coffee. "It's just another change, so many changes this past year." Russell studied her face. "Good changes, I hope. The best," she assured him with a smile. "A year ago I thought my life was over. Now—" She gestured to the house, the ranch, the beautiful land around them. "Now I have hope again." Russell's expression softened. "You've brought life back to this place, Grace. You and the children." The simple admission touched her deeply. "We've found life here too." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun slip below the horizon. As twilight descended, Grace became acutely aware of Russell's proximity. The clean scent of him mingled with sawdust and honest sweat. She found herself wondering what it would be like to step into his arms, to feel them close around her. The thought startled her with its intensity. Since her husband's death, she'd locked away such feelings, focusing solely on survival and her children's welfare. Now, unbidden, they resurfaced with a force that left her breathless. "I should check on supper," she said abruptly, needing distance to collect herself. Russell seemed to sense her sudden discomfort. "I'll clean up here and be in shortly." Grace retreated to the kitchen, her heart pounding. What was happening to her? Russell was her employer, her children's protector, not a man she should be having such thoughts about. Yet she couldn't deny the growing attraction, the way her pulse quickened when he entered a room, the comfort she found in his presence. By the time Russell came in for supper, Grace had composed herself. They ate with the children, listening to their excited chatter about the new rooms and their plans for arranging their belongings. The normalcy of the family meal steadied Grace, reminding her of all they had built together over the past year. Later, after the children were asleep, Grace sat on the porch with her mending, enjoying the cool evening air. Russell joined her, settling into his customary chair. "I was thinking," he began without preamble, "that Thomas needs proper schooling." Grace looked up from her sewing. "The town school is quite far." "Yes, but there's a new schoolhouse being built closer to the Crawford place. It should be ready by fall term." Russell seemed unusually hesitant. "I thought all 3 children could attend. Abigail and Thomas certainly, and perhaps Margaret next year." Grace considered this. Education had been a luxury she'd feared her children might never have. "That would be wonderful." "Good." Russell nodded, as if having settled an important matter. "There's something else." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. Grace's hand stilled on her mending as he extended it toward her. "What's this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Open it," Russell urged softly. With trembling fingers, Grace untied the pouch and tipped its contents into her palm. A ring gleamed in the lamplight, a simple gold band with a small, perfect pearl. "It was my mother's," Russell explained, his voice low. "My father gave it to her when they married." Grace's heart pounded so loudly she was certain Russell must hear it. "Russell, I'm not good with words, Grace," he interrupted, his usually confident voice uncertain. "But this past year with you and the children, it's shown me what my life was missing." He took a deep breath. "I care for you, for all of you, more than I thought possible, and I'd like to make what we have official if you're willing." Grace stared at the ring, emotions overwhelming her. "Are you asking me to marry you?" Russell met her eyes steadily. "Yes, I am. Because of the children." "Because it would be proper." She needed to know his heart. "No," he said firmly. "Because I love you, Grace Zimmerman. I think I've loved you since I saw you standing strong on that auction block, protecting your children with everything you had." His voice grew husky. "I've tried to keep my distance, to be respectful of your grief and your situation. But my feelings haven't changed, they've only grown stronger." Tears filled Grace's eyes. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," she admitted. "After Jacob died, I thought that part of my life was over. But you—" She reached for his hand, holding it tightly. "You brought hope back into my world, Russell, not just security for my children, but hope for me. and somewhere along the way that hope turned to love. Russell's face transformed with joy. "Is that a yes?" Grace laughed through her tears. "Yes, Russell Rawlins, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then raised her hand to his lips, placing a gentle kiss on her knuckles. The tender gesture broke something loose in Grace, the last restraint she'd placed on her feelings. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. Russell's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb gently wiping away a tear. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he brought his lips to hers in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened as years of loneliness and months of growing affection found expression. When they finally parted, both breathless, Russell pressed his forehead to hers. "I've wanted to do that for a very long time," he confessed. Grace smiled, feeling younger and lighter than she had in years. "We have a lifetime for that now." They told the children the next morning over breakfast. Grace had worried about their reaction, especially Thomas, who might have the strongest memories of his father, but her concerns proved unfounded. "Does this mean Russell will be our pa now?" Thomas asked, his eyes wide with hope rather than distress. Russell answered carefully. "If you'd like that, Thomas, I'd be honored to be your pa, but I know you had a father who loved you. I wouldn't want to replace those memories." Thomas considered this with serious concentration. "I think my first pa wouldn't mind," he decided finally. "He'd want someone to teach me man things, and you're good at that." Russell's eyes grew suspiciously bright. "Thank you, son. That means a great deal to me." Abigail had practical questions about the wedding and their living arrangements, while little Margaret simply climbed into Russell's lap and declared, "I already call you Papa in my head sometimes." The simple statement nearly undid Russell completely. He gathered the small girl close, pressing a kiss to her curls. Over her head, his eyes met Grace's, filled with a love that embraced not just her but the entire family they were becoming. They married 3 weeks later in the small church in Ely. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, attended by neighbors and the few friends they'd made. Russell stood tall and proud in a new suit, his usually stern face softened with joy as Grace walked toward him in a dove-gray dress she'd sewn herself. The children stood with them, Abigail and Margaret with small bouquets of wildflowers, Thomas solemn and important as he held the rings. "I, Russell James Rawlins, take you, Grace Elizabeth Zimmerman, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Russell vowed, his deep voice steady and sure. "I promise to love and cherish you and your children as my own, to protect and provide for our family, and to be faithful to you alone, as long as we both shall live." Grace's voice trembled slightly as she repeated her own vows, adding, "I promise to make our house a true home, to stand beside you through all life brings, and to love you with all my heart for the rest of my days." As Russell's lips met hers to seal their vows, cheers erupted from their small audience. The children joined them in an embrace that encompassed their new family, no longer a woman and her children taken in by a solitary cowboy, but a true family bound by choice and love. The wedding celebration continued at the ranch, where neighbors brought food and music. Children played in the yard while adults danced and socialized. Russell, usually reserved in company, seemed transformed by happiness, dancing with Grace and each of her daughters, even joining in when someone called for him to demonstrate a reel. As evening fell, guests departed with good wishes and knowing smiles. The children, exhausted from excitement, fell asleep quickly in their new rooms, leaving the newlyweds alone for the first time. In the privacy of what was now their bedroom, Grace felt a sudden shyness descend. Russell seemed to understand, moving slowly as he helped her with the buttons at the back of her dress. We have all the time in the world, he murmured, pressing a gentle kiss to her shoulder. His patience and tenderness eased her nervousness. This was Russell, her Russell, who had shown nothing but respect and kindness from the moment they met. When his lips found hers, Grace responded with growing confidence, letting the love she'd held in check for so long finally express itself fully. Their coming together was a revelation and affirmation of the bond that had grown between them over the past year. In Russell's arms, Grace found not just passion but a profound sense of homecoming, as if every step of her difficult journey had been leading her here, to this man, this life. Afterward, lying in the circle of his arms, Grace traced the scar that ran along Russell's ribs, evidence of a life worked hard and sometimes dangerously. "What are you thinking?" Russell asked, his voice drowsy with contentment. "That I'm happier than I ever thought I could be again," Grace admitted. "When Jacob died and the debts came due, I thought my life was over. Standing on that auction block was the worst moment of my life." She raised herself on one elbow to look into his eyes. "But it led me to you, to this home, to this happiness." Russell tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "From the moment I saw you, I knew you were someone special, someone who would fight for what mattered. I admired your courage before I ever knew your name. And I thought you were my salvation," Grace said softly. "I didn't realize then that you would also be my heart's completion." As autumn painted the Nevada landscape in gold and crimson, Grace found herself rushing to the outhouse each morning, her stomach rebelling against even the thought of breakfast. She kept the symptoms hidden as long as possible, not wanting to raise hopes prematurely, but Russell was too observant to be fooled for long. "Are you unwell?" he asked one morning, finding her pale and sipping peppermint tea instead of eating. "Not unwell," she replied, a small smile playing at her lips, "just expecting." Russell froze, coffee cup halfway to his mouth. "Expecting, you mean?" Grace nodded, her smile growing wider. "A baby, our baby, come spring if my calculations are right." The cup clattered to the table as Russell surged to his feet, drawing her into a careful embrace. "A baby," he repeated, wonder filling his voice. He pulled back to look at her face. "Are you happy about this?" "Very," Grace assured him, touched by his concern. "Are you?" In answer, Russell kissed her with such tenderness that tears sprang to her eyes. "More than I can say," he whispered against her lips. They told the children that evening. Reactions varied. Abigail was excited at the prospect of another sibling to mother. Thomas seemed slightly uncertain about his position in the family, and Margaret was simply confused about where babies came from. "From God," Grace explained simply. "He puts them in mothers' tummies to grow until they're ready to be born." This seemed to satisfy Margaret, but Thomas remained thoughtful. Later that evening, Russell found the boy sitting alone on the porch steps, his young face serious in the fading light. "Mind if I join you?" Russell asked, settling beside him without waiting for an answer. Thomas shrugged, picking at a splinter in the wooden step. "Something on your mind, son?" Russell prompted gently. The boy hesitated, then blurted, "Will you love the new baby more because it's really yours?" Russell's heart constricted at the vulnerability in the question. "Thomas, look at me," he said, waiting until the boy raised his eyes. "You and your sisters became mine the moment I decided to keep your family together. Biology doesn't make a father, love does. And I love you as much as I could love any child of my blood." Thomas's eyes searched his, looking for reassurance. "Really, really," Russell confirmed. "In fact, you have a special place in my heart because you were my first son, the first boy I got to teach and watch grow. That's a privilege I'll never forget." The worry eased from Thomas's face. "So I'll still be your helper with ranch work. Even when the baby comes." "Absolutely," Russell assured him. "I'll need you more than ever." Babies take up a lot of a mother's time, so you and I will have to keep things running smooth." This prospect brightened Thomas considerably. "I can help with my sisters too," he offered. "I'm good at making Margaret laugh when she's cranky." Russell ruffled the boy's hair affectionately. "You're a good brother, Thomas, and you'll be a good big brother to the new baby too." The winter of 1877-78 proved harsh, with heavy snowfall and bitter cold that tested even the most seasoned ranchers. Russell worked tirelessly to ensure their livestock survived, often returning to the house with frost in his beard and exhaustion in his eyes. Grace, now visibly pregnant, managed the household with quiet efficiency despite her condition, making sure Russell had hot meals and dry clothes, and that the children continued their studies during the weeks when snow made the journey to school impossible. On a particularly brutal January night, with wind howling around the eaves and snow piling against the windows, Russell returned from a final check of the barn. Grace had waited up, keeping coffee hot and worry at bay. "The animals are secure," he reported, stamping snow from his boots. "Extra hay for the horses and cows. They'll weather this fine." Grace helped him remove his heavy coat, noticing how he winced when he rotated his shoulder. "You're hurt." "Just an old injury complaining about the cold," Russell dismissed. "Nothing to worry about." But Grace insisted on examining his shoulder, finding the muscles knotted with tension and cold. She warmed oil by the fire and massaged the ache away, her gentle hands working magic on the tight muscles. Russell groaned in appreciation. "You have healing hands, Mrs. Rawlins." "Only for you, Mr. Rawlins," she teased, pressing a kiss to his neck. He captured her hand, bringing it to his lips. "How are you feeling? The baby giving you trouble?" "Active tonight," Grace admitted, guiding his hand to her rounded belly. "Feel that?" Russell's expression softened in wonder as he felt the strong movements of their child. "Strong," he murmured, "like its mother." Grace leaned against him, savoring his warmth and solid presence. "I'm glad you're home safe. I worry when you're out in weather like this." "I'll always come home to you," Russell promised, pulling her closer. "Nothing could keep me away." As January gave way to February, and February to March, the snow gradually retreated and the first signs of spring emerged. Grace's pregnancy progressed normally, though her increased size made household tasks more challenging. The children helped more, especially Abigail, who seemed to have a natural talent for cooking and took over much of the meal preparation under Grace's guidance. Russell, too, shouldered additional household responsibilities without complaint, often sitting with the children in the evenings to review their schoolwork while Grace rested. His growing bond with all three children warmed Grace's heart. Thomas followed him everywhere, learning ranching skills with eager attention. Abigail sought his opinion on her projects and books, and little Margaret had claimed a special place in his affections, often falling asleep in his lap during evening stories. On a mild April morning, Grace awoke to the unmistakable cramping that signaled the beginning of labor. She lay quietly for a moment, mentally preparing for what lay ahead. Beside her, Russell slept deeply, exhausted from the previous day's work. Grace slipped carefully from bed, not wanting to wake him yet. There would be time enough when the pains grew stronger. She moved quietly through her morning routine, setting bread to rise and preparing breakfast for the family. By the time Russell and the children came downstairs, she had managed to serve breakfast despite two strong contractions that required her to grip the back of a chair for support. Russell's sharp eyes missed nothing. "Grace, is it time?" She nodded, attempting a reassuring smile as another contraction began. "I think so, but there's no rush yet. First babies often take their time." Russell was already moving, his calm efficiency belying his concern. Abigail, get your brother and sister ready for school. You'll be staying with the Crawfords today. Thomas, run to the barn and hitch the wagon, we may need it later. I'll ride for the midwife now. Grace touched his arm. There's time, Russell. The pains are still far apart. I'm not taking chances, he said firmly, pressing a quick kiss to her forehead. Mrs. Porter said to fetch her at the first signs. Within half an hour, Russell had departed for the midwife's home 10 miles away, and the children had been settled with clear instructions and reassurances about their mother's condition. Left alone, Grace continued her preparations, moving around the house between contractions, gathering clean linens and positioning the birthing chair Russell had made according to Mrs. Porter's specifications. By mid-morning, when Russell returned with the midwife, a capable older woman with gray-streaked hair and kind eyes, Grace's labor had intensified considerably. "Well now, Mrs. Rawlins," Mrs. Porter said briskly after examining her, "you're progressing nicely. This baby seems eager to meet its family." Russell hovered anxiously until the midwife shooed him out. "Go tend your stock, Mr. Rawlins. This will likely take hours yet, and you're of no use to anyone pacing holes in the floorboards. I'll call if we need you." Reluctantly, Russell obeyed, but Grace noticed him finding reasons to pass near the house throughout the day, his concern evident in the tense set of his shoulders. As afternoon stretched into evening, Grace's labor intensified. Mrs. Porter remained calm and encouraging, helping her walk, change positions, and breathe through increasingly powerful contractions. "You're doing wonderfully," the older woman assured her. "Strong as any woman I've attended, and I've brought hundreds of babies into this world." When twilight descended, Russell returned to the house, his face lined with worry. Mrs. Porter allowed him to sit with Grace between contractions, holding her hand and wiping her brow with a cool cloth. "You're the strongest person I know," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her damp forehead. Grace managed a tired smile. "I don't feel very strong right now." "You are," he insisted, "and soon we'll meet our child." The final stages of labor came swiftly after that. Mrs. Porter positioned Grace on the birthing chair, instructing Russell to support her from behind. With his strong arms around her and his voice murmuring encouragement in her ear, Grace found the strength for the final, tremendous effort. With a cry that seemed torn from her very soul, she pushed their child into the world. The room filled with the indignant wail of a newborn protesting its abrupt arrival. "A boy," Mrs. Porter announced triumphantly, quickly wiping the infant and placing him on Grace's chest. "A fine, healthy son." Grace stared down at the red, wrinkled face of their child, overcome with love and wonder. "Russell, look at him. He's perfect." Russell's arms tightened around them both, his voice choked with emotion. He's absolutely perfect." He pressed his cheek against Grace's hair. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for our son." They named him Joseph Russell Rawlins, honoring both the man who had been a father figure to Russell and the father who had given him life. Joseph Joey, as they quickly began calling him, had his father's strong build and his mother's determined chin. His eyes, blue at birth like all newborns, gradually darkened to a shade between Russell's bright blue and Grace's warm brown. The children adored their new brother. Thomas took his role as elder brother seriously, solemnly explaining ranch operations to the infant who could not possibly understand. Abigail mothered him with enthusiastic, if sometimes overzealous attention. And Margaret, delighted to no longer be the youngest, appointed herself Joey's special protector, jealously guarding his cradle from imagined threats. As spring blossomed into full summer, Grace recovered her strength, and the rhythm of family life adjusted to include its newest member. Russell proved to be a devoted father to all 4 children, but Grace often found him in the nursery at odd hours, simply watching Joey sleep with an expression of wonder on his face. "I never thought I'd have this," he admitted one night as they stood together beside the cradle. "A wife, children, a true family. After my own childhood, I believed families brought more pain than joy." He drew Grace close. "You've given me everything I never dared hope for." Grace leaned into his embrace. "We've built this together, Russell. From that day in Ely when you kept us from being separated, we've been creating this family one day at a time." Russell's arms tightened around her. "The best decision I ever made was bidding on a brave woman with 3 children clinging to her skirts." On Joey's first birthday in April 1879, they held a small celebration at the ranch. Neighbors came bearing gifts and good wishes, admiring the thriving child and the prosperous ranch. "You've done well for yourself, Rawlins," Jim Crawford remarked as they watched the children playing in the yard. "Fine family, growing herd, good land. You're a fortunate man." "The most fortunate," Russell agreed, his eyes finding Grace across the gathering. She looked up as if sensing his gaze, offering a smile that still, after nearly 2 years of marriage, made his heart race. Later, when guests had departed and the children were asleep, Russell and Grace sat on the porch swing he'd built the previous summer. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. "Happy?" Russell asked, his arm around her shoulders. Grace nestled closer. "Completely. You've given me everything I could want: security for my children, a home filled with love, a husband who cherishes me." She twisted slightly to look up at him. "Are you happy, Russell?" He considered the question with characteristic thoroughness. "I used to think happiness was having land that was mine, being beholden to no one," he said slowly. "I thought independence was the key to contentment." "And now?" Grace prompted when he fell silent. Russell's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. "Now I know true happiness comes from connection, not isolation, from loving and being loved." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "From you, Grace, from our family." The years passed, bringing changes both expected and surprising. The ranch prospered under Russell's careful management, expanding to include more cattle and better grazing land. The children grew, each developing distinct personalities and interests. Thomas, at 14, showed every sign of following in Russell's footsteps, with a natural affinity for ranching and a quiet, steady nature. Abigail, now 12, excelled in school and dreamed of becoming a teacher. 8-year-old Margaret revealed an unexpected talent for music, singing like an angel and picking up any instrument with remarkable ease. And young Joey, sturdy and fearless at 4, trailed after his siblings and father with boundless energy and curiosity. In the spring of 1882, Grace discovered she was expecting again. Russell's joy matched hers. Their family, already rich in love, would welcome another member. "I hope it's a girl this time," Russell remarked one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset. "Another daughter with your grace and kindness." "I thought most men wanted sons," Grace teased. Russell smiled, his hand gently covering the slight swell of her belly. "I have 2 fine sons already, and daughters." His gaze drifted to where Abigail was helping Margaret practice reading. "Daughters are special. They keep a man's heart soft." In November, Eleanor Grace Rawlins entered the world on a clear, cold morning, a tiny, perfect girl with a shock of auburn hair like her father's and eyes that promised to be as warm as her mother's. Standing in the nursery with his newborn daughter cradled in his strong hands, Russell looked up at Grace with eyes full of emotion. "5 children," he said wonderingly. "If someone had told me 6 years ago that I'd have 5 children and the most beautiful wife in Nevada, I'd have said they were touched in the head. Grace laughed softly. Life has a way of surprising us. Best surprise of my life was seeing you that day in Ely, Russell said seriously. Standing tall despite everything, protecting your children with nothing but courage and love. He looked down at their daughter, sleeping peacefully in his hands. I knew then you were something special. I just didn't know you'd become my whole world. Grace crossed to his side, wrapping her arms around him and their daughter. And you became ours, the man who kept our family together when the world tried to tear us apart. The man who gave us a home, a future, and so much love. Russell bent to kiss her, the tenderness in the gesture speaking volumes. I'll always keep our family together, Grace. That's a promise I made the day I saw you on that auction block, and it's one I'll keep until my dying day. I know, Grace whispered, resting her head against his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. That's why I fell in love with you, the cowboy who saw a family worth saving and had the courage to act. Outside their window, the Nevada sun set in a blaze of glory, painting the land in gold and promise. Inside, a family born of courage, compassion, and love held close to one another, secure in the knowledge that whatever the future might bring, they would face it together.